Welcome back, students. Mr. Holmes here. Going to talk to you about space and how artists create it. This is space part two. Let's dive in. A way artists create space is by making overlapping forms and images. It's going to take figures or objects and you place them in front of one another to make them appear closer to the viewer. The cyclist down here is a great example. Cyclist closer to the lens or closer to the viewer appears much larger, and we know he's in the foreground because he's overlapping his other cycling friends there. Whoops. Alrighty. Here is a classical example of overlapping. This is done by John Sloan in 1907, titled South Beach Bathers. When you overlap something on top of another thing, it tells our eyes that the thing on top is closer. If Sloan would have painted the above picture with no overlapping and each figure with space around it, it would flatten the picture and remove the realistic sense of depth. Another way artists can use create space in their pieces is by having different size differences of the objects. Larger objects and figures appear closer, as we saw with the cyclist and with overlapping, as well as small objects and figures appear farther away. Now, for those indoctrined, we know that these all-terrain armored transports, or AT-ATs for short, are all the same size. But the artist here in this image put one of the AT-ATs further back in the background to create a size difference and the illusion of space in the piece. Now, Zoolander can't figure this out. He can't tell the size difference between this library and what's going to be built. So what is this? How can we do size differences in our pieces? Make sure we keep that in mind as we're moving forward, that you can really play with the scale to create a sense of space in your pieces. Another way artists create space is by location and placement of their subjects. Closer objects and figures are usually placed lower in the picture. That tells us that it's closer to the viewer or closer to our lens, how we're going to see it. Whereas farther objects and figures are placed higher in the picture. Here is The Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte by Georges Seurat. This is a great example of how Georges Seurat creates space in his paintings by having closer objects in the foreground or lower on the image. And as your eyes make your way up the painting, things get further and further away from you. That is space. Now we're on to atmospheric or aerial perspective. These terms are pretty interchangeable here throughout the lesson. So if I say atmospheric or aerial perspective, you know I'm talking about the same thing. Details. How are details shown through atmospheric or aerial perspective? Details are easier to appear in the foreground. They're closer to you, right? They're closer to your eyes. The viewer is more up close and personal and interacting in a more intimate way with these objects. As the distance increases, the details decrease. Kind of how our own eyes work, right? If you look into the horizon, you can see things much more in focus that are closer to you. And as the street signs or trees or whatever you're looking at gets farther away, they start to fade around the edges a little bit. Same thing's going to happen in your art pieces. Another way to emulate it is by messing with your colors. Colors are more intense and up close and in intensity. As you go farther in the distance, you're going to lose that saturation. They're going to be less intense. So these really dark mountains here in this image, you see as they fade in the distance here, they turn this light shade of blue. Now, if we don't have access to using different forms of color at our pieces at home, we can do this through values. Values have the same principle as colors do when we're talking about atmospherical perspective. The closer the image is, the darker the value. And the lighter the value, the images in the back become lighter in value. Just how the colors work the same way. This mountain range in the back, right? A lighter blue than the mountain range in front. Well, in this mountain range on this lake, you see the values shift as well. So if you're only working with pencils for this next project, make sure you adjust your values appropriately. Darker in front, lighter in the background. Here's a real world example of Bixby Bridge, also known as Bixby Canyon Bridge. It's along the Big Sur coast right here in California, down the one. So this is showing us a great example of how value change and color change is affecting the viewer's perception of this photograph. You notice that up front here, these mountains are vibrant, rich greens, browns, and as the distance gains and the landscape fades away into the background, it gets desaturated. It loses all this color. Here's an easy to view example of atmospheric perspective. This is the same cube, just fading off in the distance. You notice that the value of the colors are fading as well, getting less and less as the image recedes into the background on our horizon line, which you can see there, differentiated by that shade of gray. Another example of not only a horizon line, vanishing points, but also atmospheric perspective. And lastly, here we have some trees in a beautiful field, a sun reflecting on a body of water in the far background there. You can see the artist created space in this photograph by having this large tree front and foremost as the subject, making it appear larger as the rest of them by having overlap the other trees in the image, creating atmospheric perspective by having the values in the distance fade off and tone away as well. So that is the lecture for this week, everybody. You're going to use this in depth for your assignment of the week, which is going to be creating a landscape of your own. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or message me here on Schoology. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk